The Battle of Talavera was fought just outside the town of Talavera de la Reina, Spain, some 120 kilometers southwest of Madrid. During the Peninsular War.At Talavera, an Anglo-Spanish army under Sir Arthur Wellesley combined with the Spanish army under General Cuesta in operations against French-occupied Madrid. After fierce fighting, the Grande Armée acute attacks were repulsed several times. During the overnight lull in action, it withdrew from the field. After Marshal Soult's French army had retreated from Portugal, General Wellesley's 20,000 British troops advanced into Spain to join 33,000 Spanish troops under General Cuesta. They marched up the Tagus Valley to Talavera, some 120 kilometers southwest of Madrid. They encountered 46,000 French under Marshal Claude Victor and Major General Horace Sebastiani, with the French King of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte, in nominal command. The French crossed the Albiche in the middle of the afternoon on the 27th of July. A couple of hours later, the French attacked the right of the Spaniards and the British left. A strategic hill was taken and lost, until, finally, the British held it firmly. At daybreak on the 28th of July, the French attacked the British left again to retake the hill and were repulsed when the 29th Foot and 48th Foot, who had been lying behind the crest, stood up and carried out a bayonet charge. A French cannonade lasted until noon, when a negotiated armistice of 2 hours began. That afternoon, a heavy exchange of cannon fire started ahead of various infantry and cavalry skirmishes. Early in the evening, a major engagement resulted in the French being held off. A cannon duel continued until dark. At daylight, the British and Spanish discovered that the bulk of the French force had retired, leaving the wounded and 2 brigades of artillery in the field. Wellesley was ennobled as Viscount Wellington of Talavera and of Wellington for the action. Preliminary movements. On the 27th of July, Wellesley sent out the 3rd Division and some cavalry under the command of Anson to cover Cuesta's retreat into the Talavera position. But when Anson's cavalry mistakenly pulled back, the French rushed in to surprise and inflict over 400 casualties on Roof and Donkin's brigade, forcing them to fall back. That night Victor sent Ruffin's division to seize the hill known as Cerro de Medellin in a coup de main. 2 of Ruffin's 3 regiments went astray in the dark, but the 9th Light Infantry routed Sigismund Lowe's KGL Brigade and pushed forward to capture the high ground. Alertly, Hill sent Richard Stewart's brigade on a counter-attack which drove the French away. The British suffered some 800 casualties on the 27th. During the evening of 27th, French dragoon squadrons were riding close to the Spanish position, firing the carbines at Spanish skirmishers. Suddenly, without orders, Cuesta's entire Spanish line fired a thunderous volley at the French dragoons. The French were outside the range of the Spanish muskets, and little harm was done to them. 4 Spanish battalions threw down the weapons and fled in panic. Wellesley wrote, nearly 2,000 ran off on the evening of the 27th, who were neither attacked nor threatened with an attack, and who were frightened by the noise of their own fire. They left their arms and accoutrements on the ground. Their officers went with them, and they plundered the baggage of the British army which had been sent to the rear. While a majority of the panicked troops were brought back, many hundreds continued to flee, taking some rear echelon British with them. Opposing armies. The Allied Army. Wellesley's British Army consisted of 4 infantry divisions, 3 cavalry brigades and 30 cannon, totaling 20,641 troops. The infantry included the 1st Division under John Cope Sherbrick, the 2nd Division led by Rowland Hill, the 3rd Division commanded by Alexander Mackenzie and the 4th Division under Alexander Campbell. Henry Fane led a brigade of heavy cavalry, while Stapleton Cotton and George Johnson commanded light cavalry brigades. There were 3 British and 2 King's German Legion batteries with 6 guns apiece. Cuesta's Spanish army of 35,000 was organized into 5 infantry and 2 cavalry divisions, plus about 30 artillery pieces, some 12-pounds guns. The 28,000 infantry were in José Pascual de Zaya's Whitechakin's 1st Division and Vanguard, Iglesias's 2nd Division, Portugal's 3rd Division, Manglano's 4th Division, and Juan Procopio Basicourt y Brice's 5th Division. Henestrosa and the Duke of Albuquerque led the 6,000 horsemen of the 1st and 2nd Cavalry Divisions and there were 800 artillerymen. The French army. While Joseph nominally led the French army, his military advisor Marshal Jean-Baptiste Jourdan actually exercised command over the 37,700 infantry and artillerymen, 8,400 cavalry and about 80 cannon. Victor's First Corps included the infantry divisions of François Aimable Ruffin, Pierre Bellon Lapis and Eugène Casimir Villet, plus Louis Création Carrière Beaumont's 1,000-man light cavalry brigade. Sebastiani's 4th Corps consisted of his own infantry division, Jean-Baptiste Serres, Comte de Valence's Poles and Jean-François Laval with his German-Dutch division. Christophe-Antoine Merlin led the 4th Corps light cavalry brigade. Marie-Victor de Fay, Marquis de La Tour Maubourg and Edouard Jean-Baptiste Milhard commanded the 2 heavy dragoon divisions of the cavalry reserve. The Madrid garrison included part of Jean-Joseph Marquis de Soles's division, the King's Spanish Foot Guards and 2 regiments of cavalry. Positions. In the morning, it could be seen that the bulk of Cuesta's army held the right while the British formed the left. The Spanish right was anchored on the city of Talavera on the Tagus River and followed the course of the Portina stream. In the center the British had built a redoubt, which was backed by the 4th Division and in which they placed a battery of 4 3-pounds light cannons. Further to the left, the Medellin Hill was held by the 1st Division, with the 2nd Division to its left. The 3rd Division plus Fans and Cotton's cavalry formed the reserve. On the far left, Basicourt's Spanish division was positioned on some high ground near the Sierra de Seguria. Anson's brigade covered the valley between the Medellin and the Seguria, supported by Albuquerque's Spanish horsemen. Joseph and Jourdan massed Victor's First Corps on the French right, holding the hill of Cerro de Cascagel. Sebastiani's corps held the center, while La Tour Maubourg and the Madrid garrison stood in reserve. On the French left, Milhard's horsemen faced almost the entire Spanish army. Opposite the Medellin, the Cascagel bristled with 30 French cannon. Battle. Victor urged his superiors for a massive attack, but Joseph and Jourdan chose to peck away at the Anglo-Spanish position. At dawn, the guns on the Cascagel opened up, causing some loss among the British infantry formed in the open. Having learned the hard way about the destructive power of French artillery, Wellesley soon pulled his soldiers back into cover. Again, Ruffin's division attacked the Medellin. Each battalion was formed in a column of divisions with a width of 2 companies and a depth of 3. Each regiment's 3 battalions advanced side by side with only a small gap between units. This would make each regimental attack roughly 160 files across and 9 ranks deep. When Ruffin's men got within effective range, the British emerged from cover in 2 deep lines to overlap the French columns, riddled by fire from front and flank, and with the rear 6 ranks unable to fire, the French columns broke and ran. Victor shifted Ruffin's survivors to the right against the Seguria and supported them with one of Villet's brigades. Lapis, Sebastiani and Laval then launched a frontal attack attack against the British 1st and 4th Divisions. Alexander Campbell's men and the Spanish levels attack, which went in first. Lapis and Sebastiani then advanced in two lines using the same regimental columns that Ruffin had employed. Henry Campbell's Guards Brigade routed the French regiments opposite them, then charged in pursuit, running into the French second line and intense artillery fire. The Guards and the Germans with them were routed in the turn, losing 500 men, and carried away Cameron's brigade with them. Seeing Guards and his centre broken, Wellesley personally brought up the 48th Foot to plug the hole caused by the dispersal of Sherbrooke's division. Backed by Mackenzie's brigade, the 48th broke the French second line's attack as the Guards rallied in the rear. Lapis was mortally wounded. The main French attack having been defeated, Victor pushed Ruffin's men into the valley between the Medellin and the Seguria. Anson's cavalry brigade was ordered to drive them back, while the 1st KGL Hussars advanced at a controlled pace. The 23rd Light Dragoons soon broke into a wild gallop. The undisciplined unit ran into a hidden ravine, hobbling many horses. Those horsemen who cleared the obstacle were easily fended off by the French infantry, formed into squares. The 23rd Light Dragoons charged past the squares and ploughed into Beaumont's cavalry, drawn up behind Ruffin. The British Dragoons lost 102 killed and wounded and another 105 captured before they cut the way out. After the battle, the mauled regiment had to be sent back to England to refit. However, this ended the French attacks for the day. Joseph and Jordan failed to employ the reserve, for which they were bitterly criticized by Napoleon. Results: the French, in this hard-fought set-piece battle, lost 7,389 to 944 killed, 6,294 wounded, 156 prisoners. The Allies lost more, 7,468. The Spanish casualties were about 1,200 and British casualties were 6,268, including 800 killed, over the 2 days of fighting. This was approximately 25% of the British force, compared to only 18% of the French. Although it is clear that the brunt of the French attack fell on the British, many of the wounded on both sides were burned to death when the dry grass of the battlefield caught fire. The next day, the 3,000 infantry of the Light Division reinforced the British Army after completing a famous march of 42 miles in 26 hours. Meanwhile, Marshal Soult advanced south, threatening to cut Wellesley off from Portugal. Thinking that the French force was only 15,000 strong, Wellesley moved east on the 3rd of August to block it, leaving 1,500 wounded in the care of the Spanish. Spanish guerrillas captured a message from Soult to Joseph that Soult had 30,000 men and brought it to Wellesley. The British commander, realizing his line of retreat was about to be cut by a larger French force, sent the Light Brigade on a mad dash for the bridge over the Tagus River at Almaraz. The light infantry reached there on the 6th of August, just ahead of Soult. By the 20th of August, all British forces had withdrawn across the mountains, and for the next 6 months, until the 27th of February 1810, Wellesley's forces took no part in the hard fighting in southern Spain and along the Portuguese border. Despite numerous invitations from the Spanish had also promised food to the British if they advanced back into Spain, but Wellington, with an army incapable of living off the land like the French and without its own transport, did not trust his ally to provide these essentials and made general excuses blaming the Spanish for various deficiencies of the government and army. In the event of the retreat, the British abandoned nearly all of the baggage and ammunition as well as the artillery captured from the French at Talavera. The Spanish made another attempt to take Madrid, with Wellesley still refusing to participate, and they were ultimately badly defeated at the Battle of Acana in November 1809. Historian Charles Oman, in Volume 2 of his History of the Peninsular War, calls the Talavera campaign a failure for the Anglo-Spanish allies, placing the blame on various Spanish errors while dismissing much of the criticism of Wellesley and the British, suggesting there was no reason to imagine a concentration of the French forces opposing them. Oman also attributes some of the failure to Wellesley's ignorance of the conditions in Spain at the time. At the start of the campaign, Wellington received the promised provisions while both the French and the Spanish were suffering severe shortages of food. He complained more about the failure of the Spanish to provide transport for the provisions than food, attributing this to maliciousness on the part of the Spanish, apparently unaware that there was no transport to be had for any army in that area. After this battle, Wellesley was created Viscount Wellington of Talavera. Popular culture. Talavera is the setting for Sharp Seagull, the first book written in Bernard Cornwell's Sharp series, and is depicted in the conclusion of the film adaptation of the same name, in A Magnum for Schneider, a 1967 pilot for the British TV series Callan starring Edward Woodward. Callan and Schneider refight the Battle of Talavera as a war game. The scene is replicated in Callan created James Mitchell's 1969 novel Red File for Callan. Eugene O'Neill's play A Touch of the Poet takes place on the same day 19 years after the battle and plays a significant part in the story and its characters.